firstly, I put this slide up here because probably none of you have ever heard of me, and I'm not really widely published at all. I've got an Instagram account which seems to be going kind of well, but I just use it as a diary more than anything, like a little sketchbook, and people seem to like it, which is nice, but that's not necessarily why I do it. I just sort of like it's a little act of discipline. I graduated from the landscape architecture school here years ago in 1990, when the school was still across in Building 9, and we had a really cool school where interior designers, architects and landscape architects all intermingled, and you could do each other's studios, and lots of us did architecture studios and interior design studios, and one of the most memorable studios I had was a Peter Corrigan studio where he had an uncanny ability to make various members of the studio cry because of the emotional, overwhelming nature of his teaching method. But I have to say, in that 6 months, I learnt more about design than I did for pretty much the rest of my time there. He was incredible. So then I graduated into the Kane-Kerner recession of the 90s, and had a sort of a limited amount of practice. So I did masters of urban design, and we had an amazing time with that as well. And I had Howard Raggett and Ian McDougall as lecturers, and we had Michael Sorkin come out from the States and give us talks, and various other notable people, and that was a lot of fun. So I have really fond memories of my time at RMIT. It was an incredible experience, and I hope you are all having an incredible experience as well. Then I moved to Cairns, and spent about a year in Cairns, and then I lived in Brisbane for a year, and then I lived in Sydney for about 8 years, and then I've been living in Murwillumbah since 2004. So what I'll do is I'll just sort of run through the works that I've sort of a small selection of the works that I've had done, built, my influences, talk specifically. Ada wanted me to talk specifically about a project that I kind of I conceived and designed, which was, it had to be a park, so it was in an estate called Riverstone Crossing. And then I'll show you my sort of speculative competition work, and some work in progress, and then I'll talk about boats, because I think wooden boats are amazing. So I love them, and they're kind of, in terms of materiality, it's pretty amazing. So, but the first thing I want to talk about in terms of materiality in landscape architecture is relating it to what I call the partie. And when I draw a design, I automatically think about what it is I'm designing, what it's made from, how it works, why it's made from that material, and why it shouldn't be made from any other material. And I think I took these snaps between the tarmac at Sydney Airport, where I've just been to the Landscape Australia conference, and the tarmac in Melbourne Airport. So I think airport runways are an exemplar of a partie and materiality combined, because they have to do something. They're not necessarily an aesthetic thing, but they can actually have incredibly beautiful and striking aesthetic properties, and they have to follow a program. So I think this, and it's an everyday lived experience, and it also gets back to the way in which I like to think about space, and I like to think about design. I like to think that every experience you have, whether it's going to the toilet or it's going around the corner, behind a little service area, or it's a theatre like this, or it's the main entrance of a building or a park or whatever, it should be considered. It should be thought about, and airports have to be thought about because of all the safety imperatives and the navigational imperatives and the way in which one airport talks to another airport, and how pilots navigate around runways. So I think I like these. So I just wanted to show these just because I like it. But let's start up in Cairns. This was a project which the imperative was it had to be cheap and flat and quick. So there was a kind of a 1970s mossy rock callistaman casuarina garden there, and they knocked it all over because they wanted to have the opening of the Cairns Regional Gallery, and they wanted to have something cheap and flat to replace it with. So I thought the Mark of Zorro would be pretty good. So it's just a big Z, just with some cheap, low-growing, quick-growing plants and some turf. And this was, it's no longer there. I think there's a building there or something that's gone. But I'm still proud of it. The next project is a project in Dover Heights in 2002. This was the model and the plan that was presented to council, but unfortunately planners didn't like it because it sort of, this corner around here, it sort of added too much bulk to the building, despite the fact that you can actually see through it. But so, I'm not sure how many of you have actually engaged in practice yet, but one of the things you'll come up against is legislation, and you'll have to deal with it, and you'll have to negotiate your way through a series of legislative imperatives that are imposed and administered by councils, and also the personalities, particularly within councils, and how to get around those sorts of issues. So things like this was pretty straightforward. The party was, we want some shade over half the space, so let's put some shade over half the space. We want to maintain the view out to the ocean, which is, that way, and we want to screen from the neighbours, but unfortunately the screen didn't get through council, but this is what resulted. So this was spotted gum and steel galvanised brackets, which were fabricated specifically for the job. And the client was pretty happy with that, and I was pretty happy with that, and the other residents of the unit block that it was situated in were pretty happy, and council was pretty happy. So it was joy all around. And just, I think the thing is with materials, it's like play with them as well. Don't be shy about actually using it as a form, and thinking about how you can shape it and do simple things that don't necessarily cost a lot of money. If people are spending money, work out how they can spend money but do stuff with it that's kind of a little bit more interesting and adds a little tweak to it. So I mean, that could have been flat at the end there, but I thought, no. This is a sound wall in Liverpool, in Sydney, that I designed for the council there at the intersection of the Hume Highway and Orange Grove Road. Once again, the party is pretty simple. You've only got one little stretch of space between the footpath and the existing residences, and the program was to attenuate the sound and come up with something that was going to be pretty robust, because it's in a reasonably rough neck of the woods, Liverpool, and sort of striking. So I thought about the idea of a car crash, and the fact that people coming out of Orange Grove Road and hitting the Liverpool or the Hume Highway in Liverpool would get this sort of explosive experience. And eventually, I'm not sure what it's like now, but those frames were to have climbers going up there, and the ground plane is all gazanias and lamandras because they're completely bulletproof. You can't kill them. And poas, because they're beautiful. So materials, I mean, there's a combination of materials. There's Hebel block, there's galvanised steel, there's the steel supports that sit behind the Hebel block, there's mulch and plants. So it's like, I always think, this is a nice example of what I think is good design, because, if I don't say so myself, because it's a limited palette. I always think that people like to throw all sorts of materials at a situation and try and get as much in as they can, and I really think that's a mistake. I think the best results are those that have a degree of restraint. I mean, you can still be joyful and you can still be ebullient and have fun, but you don't necessarily need to lay it on with a trowel. And then this is a project in Pyrmont called Elizabeth Healy Rest Area, which was in 1998. And this was more a case of here's an existing old park, and they needed to get down from this top of this wall on Gibbs Street down into the park, and without having to sort of walk all the way down Gibbs Street and back around to the corner. I think it's Pyrmont Ridge Road, and walk back into the park. So we wanted to create a bit more accessibility to it. And this was the result. Once again, it's simple material, so there's an edge ground plane of these pavers here. Unfortunately, I didn't get to choose my seats, and I'll get to the seats in a second. And then just a simple reference to the industrial nature of Pyrmont, using good chunky solid steel sections, sandstone, which here's an old convict sandstone wall which we flew out from, and there it is. And you've got to be conscious of things, how like the lower tread hits the ground plane, so obviously it's shorter at this end and taller at that end, so you try and measure your steps. Steps are really cool to design. I love designing steps. There's a perfect human stride, and most people design steps with a 170 riser and a 250 tread, which are horrible. I hate them. The ideal step should be 150 high and 350 wide, and it's a far more comfortable step. It takes a bit longer takes up more space, but if you can work it in, that's the golden rule, because I think and landing should be either 600 or 1200 long, because that's what the human stride naturally is, or the average of the human stride. So there are ergonomics involved, and in terms of creating the partie for the step, if you can work around that, that's a nice thing to do. So, and then we got to the seat. Now the idea here is, if we go back there's some poles. There were some poles, some light poles going in there, but they took them out. But the idea, this seat had a little enclosed cast iron roller in there, and people could move it around. So, and there were big chunky pieces of timber. And there was the drawing for that, so dealing with how the section would work. So once again, going back, this was going to be a nice big piece of steel with a bearing in there, and there'd be obviously an enclosed bearing in there, because you don't want to get the wheel stuck at all. And then nice big lumps of durable timbers like spotted gum or ironbark or tallow wood. And then you kind of think about stuff like, the edges of the holes and how they might look and work, and how you might create, something that doesn't necessarily take a lot of effort, because that's just basically a bloke with a hole saw and a router to, do a pencil edge around the edge of the holes. And yeah. This next project is in Rose Lane in Murwillumbah, where I currently live. That was built in 2012, 2013, and the imperative here was the slope was failing. It's on this siltstone, mudstone material, so that's another factor you've got to try and deal with. Is so often geology becomes critically important in your designs. And so there's an example of the stone. It's like, so the whole house had the possibility of sliding off into the river, and here you can see in the basement where the cracking was occurring. So, and there's the slope down to the river. And then basically I designed this sort of what I call the Gabian Wonderland, so that the whole house was basically re-propped up by taking an excavator, a very brave excavator driver, I might add, down this pathway and cutting a big slope down. So the house is up here, and putting these gabions in. Unfortunately, something happened. I've lost a slide. But there was a picture of the existing retaining wall there that it was a copper slug sleeper retaining wall, and it was failing pretty badly. It had reached the end of its life, and as a result there was huge drainage issues as well. So I mean, in this instance, you might think you're on a really steep slope, but drainage is critically important here, because you want to try and get the water away as quickly as possible. You don't want it, considering the geology of the landscape. And then clients decided not to put a handrail in, but they still managed to get it signed off by council, which was pretty funny. So they've got this precipitous drop, but I kind of like it. And then right down the bottom there was another platform, so connected with a set of stairs. This is a hard one to photograph. I've got a brother-in-law with a drone. I should get him up there and take some pictures. But and the slope was completely stabilised with huge plantings of lomandras, basically. So they work much in the same way as turf, but they're lomandra hystrix, which have also got a really I'm not sure if they grow down here. They might, but unlike longifolia, which is looks pretty dry and full on, hystrix is actually quite nice and lush, and it's actually got a really beautiful perfume. So you can see that's the slope. So all praise the excavator driver. May he live to be 100. Don't know what happened there. Okay. Something's happened. I'll have to we're having some Mac Windows issues before. So Rose Lane, that's that. Apologies. Right, let's go from here we go. Okay. Right. Sorry.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a short break in transmission.
So, let's go through there. That's it. So part of it was also putting this little concrete edge on the top, which act as a retaining edge, so that soil could stay behind it and wouldn't have a kind of like a messy gabion top to it. So that was reasonably easily achieved and beautifully executed by the client's brother. And that's the view, so you can kind of see why they didn't want to put handrails. This project is a bit further downstream. The imperative was just access to the riverbank and try and do it as simply as possible. So it was basically just a couple of ramps and some nicely constructed bushrock walls. And again, client decided after council came and signed off on everything that they didn't want to necessarily put handrails there. So these are private clients, obviously. With something like a commercial or public space, you're going to have to follow all the codes and make sure that everything's tickety-boo and you tick all the boxes and say yes sir, no sir, 3 bags full sir to the powers that be, because otherwise you're in trouble. And this is the same client who sold his place in South Murwillumbah where that last project was, and 2 months before Cyclone Debbie, the remnants of Cyclone Debbie came through and completely and utterly trashed South Murwillumbah. So I rang him up and said, mate, are you all right? He said, yeah, fine. We sold 2 months ago. You want to do my new garden? So I said, sure. So this is, again, it's in Robina, so it's a tight space, and he wanted to fit a lot in, so a big deck area, a pool. Originally he just had a big square pool off here in his original plan that he drew up. He wasn't quite exactly sure how he was going to deal with it. So part of my brief, and his daughter needed an Olympic-size in-ground trampoline because she's going to the Olympics apparently at some stage. And he wanted a spa and a coffee table, like a low to the ground coffee table with a fire pit in the middle of it. So if any of you have ever read Robin Boyd and Futurism, this isn't it, because we pared everything back so that everything was really minimal and everything spoke about the geometry. So the geometry is the big story here. So this was an exercise almost in pure partie drawing, in terms of getting that partie right and making sure that everything could fit in and the program would work and the pool was big enough or not too big. So initially he had the pool right there, and my idea was to actually push the pool out to here and use it as a retaining wall. So if you're going to spend the money on a pool, why not make it a retaining wall at the same time? So this is an exercise in making two things out of one. So, and then the front was just his one garage, and here's another garage. He designed his own house, which was pretty cool. I thought it was a pretty nice house. You'll see some pictures of it in a second. But there was a requirement for an exposed aggregate from the body corporate of the estate, but there was nothing to say that we couldn't put tile inserts in there. So hopefully by the time I get back, half of this should be pretty much built, but he's well and truly on the way. And then incorporating that into a geometric pattern, so you have the letterbox there. That's the line of the house eave over the second story, and just a tiny little column there. So there's a sort of a little bit kind of skewed Miesian But this is the coffee table. This is the form. There's the coffee table behind. So these flaps fold out, and then there's the fire pit in the middle. And the idea is this is an off-form concrete coffee table, basically rimmed with a brass channel section. So this would be how they actually. So one of the things that I always think about in terms of when I draw a design is how is it going to get built? Is the builder going to look at me and say you're a dickhead? Because often builders do that. People will design stuff, and the builder just looks at you and goes, "Are you on drugs or something?" So I think half the time you've got to really think about how you actually put something together. What's the physical method by which something actually gets constructed? And I think that's a big part of materiality. It's a big part of partie drawing and the whole general design process. So this was my model to show that the client exactly how the formwork for the coffee table could be made, because he didn't believe it would be easy, and I thought that could be made in a workshop. You could deliver it to site, bolt it together, fix the brass channel into place. This centerpiece could just be a piece of plastic lined foam, and then you've got all your penetrations in the slab beneath it for the gas and the electricals for the fire pit. And it's skewed as well, just to follow the geometry of the rest of the garden. And this is the pool in Axo. I call it my skewed pool. It's a cross between I'll get to the Fondazione Querini Stampalia by Carlo Scarpa. It's one of the gems, one of the true fantastic gems of one of my huge influences is Carlo Scarpa, and also the great American landscape architect Lawrence Halpern, who designed a magnificent park in Seattle called Freeway Park. So if ever you go to Seattle, go to Freeway Park, because it's one of the great works of landscape architecture of the 20th century. Don't miss it. So here it is. We're up to the stage where I think the tiling might be occurring, but there's also this deck which is going to be cantilevered out from here. So there's the client's house, these insets will have this this blue tile. So just as a kind of a banding to break it up and soften the brutalist effect. I'm a big fan of brutalism as well. So building 14, good building. So this is where the deck is going to be coming out from that corner, and it'll come out and come this way, and then it's basically formed with an I-beam to create the edge form. So that'll all be propped up and welded, and then there'll be some cruciform posts that sit underneath that a bit further out, and the whole thing will be back spanned and connected to the house, so it'll be a pretty strong structure. And this whole area through here floods as well. So when Debbie came through, the water was kind of up to the edge of the trough, where the trough would be now.
Just on that side, is that one pour?
That would be, yeah, that's one pour. So basically, when they come through and shape up a pool, because that's what they do. They would call a pour a shape. That's pool builders are pretty particular about that. So they set the formwork, put the fix the steel, and then they'll come in with a spray and they'll basically shotcrete the whole thing, and then they've got to go through and because shotcrete's what's called a low slump, high plasticity concrete. It's you can't necessarily vibrate it to get rid of all the voids in it, so it has to be rendered afterwards, so to create a waterproof seal. So that's half the reason why concrete in pools is so expensive, because it's such a manual and physical process. You can't just create the formwork and have a high slump, which is a very liquidy kind of concrete, but we'll get to that. Anyway, and here we come to Riverstone Crossing, which is the last before I get to my influences, and before we go into Sugar Mill Park. So this is the same estate as Sugar Mill Park, and this was a temporary car park, so it had to be cheap and quick to construct, but it had to do the job of being a nice thing for people to arrive at and look at. So it's just a double coat seal on the car park, concrete edging, which is cheap. All of these stones were found on site, and a fairly minimal planting scheme, and all of the spoil for the subgrade was mounted up to create these mounds. Which are kind of like turf echoes of the roofs surrounding the site. So it was a cheap way to sort of not get rid of the spoil from the excavation of the site. And then providing this little pathway where I just wanted to play with people's minds. So, but unfortunately the head of Stocklands came down after everybody else in Stocklands looked at it and said, that's fantastic, but the head of Stocklands came down from Brisbane and said, this is horrible. The mounds are blocking the view of the display village. Get rid of it. So about 2 weeks after it was built, or 3 weeks after it was built, the whole thing was taken down, which was, kind of then blew the budget and caused stress from the development manager of Stocklands. So there you go. You win some, you lose some. But, I've got pictures, so it happened. So now I'm just going to talk about some of the just a few of the great spaces. So I'm specifically going to talk about this space, which is Paley Park in New York City, which I visited in 1987. I better go quickly. 1987. This is a simple partie, so it's a step up, a forecourt here, and a water wall at the end. It's developed by the son of William S. Paley, who was the head of CBS. And it's a private park. It's got these lovely Saarinen tables and Batoya side chairs. It's open 24 hours, and it's one of the great little spaces in New York City. It's like a little haven. So I visited that years and years ago, and I have very, very fond memories. And it's got these two little concession stands. It's well used all the time. It's beautiful. Next one is Pietro Porciani's. I'm going to talk about Pietro Porciani. I'll race through it because I think we're running hideously late. I'm running hideously late. So that one, the Paley Park, was by Zion and Breen. So Zion and Breen are one of the great landscape architectural companies in America. This one is Pietro Porciani, who I've got a great love for, and hopefully I'll be trying to put on an exhibition downstairs in 2020. This is the memorial to Enrico Mattii, who was the energy czar of Italy. This was 1962, and basically the site. He a journalist and the pilot, crashed and died here. And there's 3 oak trees surrounded by these this rim of concrete slabs, and then there's this raised berm around the whole thing. It's really quite a slightly solemn, and well, it is a solemn space, and it's slightly kind of unnerving as well, because you know this was the site exactly where this bloke, you know, shuffled off his mortal coil. But it's, you know, it's stunning. It's just really, really simple. Again, restrained palette. Anyway, Pietro Porciani again. This is Villa Il Rosetto, and this was 1965. This is a garage, would you believe it? And on top of it is a roof garden. Here's the spiral staircase going up to it, and this is an exercise in off-form concrete and planting, pretty much. But Porciani was right into the idea of the grotto as being a sort of a current of Italian landscape. So he constantly designed grottos, but in the modernist style. But there's trees that were growing there on site, so he worked around the trees, and he came up with this idea that if the tree moved at all, he could just punch out some of these little bronze medallions to let the tree poke through. And this is the garden on top, and this is the garage. It's a rich person's garage, but it's stunning. Villa Fioretta by Porciani, and that's 1965. Sorry, this is a nice, really nice garden. I mean, the whole slope sort of gently, the whole site slopes down this way. There's the part here is really simple, just a series of these circular forms. There's an existing house and tennis court there. And then this access road comes in through here, and this main kind of axis which sort of doesn't really terminate at either end. But Porciani was he initially started as a horticulturalist, so but he's most definitely was in command of all of his materials. Well, I'll race through these because apparently we've got about 15 minutes. And there's a bucket load to go through yet. Villa Ottolenghi by Porciani from 1952 to 1958. Again, dealing with, I mean, history is a material to deal with as well. I think you kind of, if you treat it as a material, you can have a lot of fun with history, and I think there's some great examples. Say Tompkins Leica Greer's Hyde Park Barracks in Sydney is a really, really nice example of using history as a material. So there's stuff like the ghost staircase there, but then again, you know, playing with it and inserting modernist forms into a historic landscape. And Villa, the Theobald Garden, which is now demolished unfortunately, from Cologne in 1964. And Querini Stampalia by Carlo Scarpa, the great Carlo Scarpa. By the way, just quickly, if any of you don't already have it, and probably I suspect most of you don't, there's a terrific book by Richard Murphy, self-published in Edinburgh, and it's the best design book I own. I think I own some pretty good books in my library, but it is by far the best one. It's $125. It'll be shipped express from Edinburgh, and it'll get to you in about a week, and you'll probably spend about 3 nights fully awake reading it and feeling bleary, but picking it up in the morning when you kind of wake up from about 3 hours sleep and going straight back into it again. It's fantastic. And here we go. Another break in the... Something's happened again. I think what I'm going to have to do is quit from there, go down to there, open Alright. It's going to do that. Don't know why it's just doing it. Come on. It's not wanting to do that. Okay. Yep, 10 minutes. So I'll race through that. Bridge over, so you can see there's the bridge there, that's the architecture, there's the garden. I'll just race through that. Bridge, bridge, beautiful bronze and steel and timber, junctions, view from the main gallery into the garden, and then the garden itself, which is perhaps one of the greatest little gems you'll ever come across. So the sequence of slides basically follows this little watercourse. Now, Riverstone Crossing, just quickly. The park is here. It was the site of an old sugar mill, one of the first sugar mills in southeast Queensland. So, again, history was part of the material that we were dealing with because there was some archaeology on site. So, we did lots of research on the old sugar cane farmers and blackbirding, the history of blackbirding, which was you know, a pretty sordid history where they'd go over to New Caledonia and other Pacific nations and steal people basically to work as virtual slave labour on the sugarcane farms. And they used Aboriginal people as well. So it was pretty appalling, but needless to say, it's history, it's all part of the history of the site, so we worked on that. There's some of the archaeology. And this was all sort of carefully mapped out, and then we reconstructed a lot of this on site. This was the initial idea of using some of these parts. And the other thing as well, underneath all of this area, so this is my initial party sketch. Underneath all of this area is this big thing called the rain vault, which is like a underground water harvesting system and water purification system, because a lot of the stormwater that comes off of suburban developments is highly toxic because of all the aggregated household chemicals and car oils and all sorts of stuff that happens. So you might not think that stormwater is necessarily toxic. It can be hideously toxic. So then we thought, well, let's use some pipes as part of the artwork, and we actually worked out we could get it in budget. So this is Nancy Holt as an exemplar in Arizona, I think. And this was the idea. I can't remember, I think Adam might have drawn this. Yeah. So the idea was to create these cutouts and have these embedded concrete engraved images, and then these mounds sort of demarcating the extent of the rain vault underneath the park. Bit of Nancy Holt. And then I kind of started working on the idea of what the planting would be and how to draw that into the idea of stormwater harvesting. And then worked up a bit more of a tighter scheme. Park entrances, so there's a entrance to the park here where you can cross over and stare down the barrel, or here where you could get a view slot out to the hill opposite. And, you know, maintenance access here as well. And then we decided we'd basically reconstruct the existing, the old archaeology where it was, but 4 metres above where it was going to be because of the change in finished levels. And then this is all the text that went with it that we sent off to this formliner company, including the archaeology. Things about stormwater quality, which was an important story to tell. There's the rain vault going in, so basically, you know, say this is what's underneath you. There it is again. A bit of water. working out the tree layer, and then thinking about the whole idea of the construction of the pipes itself. And this is, you can buy these on Alibaba apparently, but this is how they usually create these pipes, which is a spun concrete section. So they basically just rotate that axle, and the pipe generally spins, and it sets, and that's a way of vibrating it. But this is how our pipes were made, which is vertically cast with vibration, manual vibration. And what we had to do was, these are the form liners, and they're attached to sheets of aluminium, and these were bolted to the inside or screwed to the inside, and then to get the mould off the pipe, then we had to basically drill the form liner off, and then the mould could be released. And these are the negative images, and then the whole issue of whether or not to have lifting ferrules and do that to them, or whether to leave them like that and not actually do any treatment like that. They sent this through and says, "Oh, we'll patch it up for you." I said, "No, don't." So concrete finishes, happy casting people, and then the documentation that we went through to complete this: planting design, tree layer, all the details, the sections, the bridges, and then the details of where to put the various form liners, the pictures, more bridges, and then the actual casting details, so it shows the solid body geometries. And then the installation. And you can see some of the imagery there. There it is. Preparation. See? Looks remarkably like Ada's drawing that he did for me. And finished, or roughly finished anyway. The old archaeological ruins, including machine mounts, reconstructed in the park, planting, and then some of the cutouts. And then we started playing around with lighting, but unfortunately they decided they didn't want to light them. I think they would have looked shit hot. So you can see here, that's where, you know, previous ferrules were, lifting ferrules were put in other pipes, so they kind of like, there was just the one mould that they had, so they weren't going to come up with a completely new mould. They just take that one mould and they adapt it for each different pipe purpose. So that was all part of the texture and the story of that particular material, which I kind of really like. It tells, it's like a little morphological trace. You think, what went on here? That's the pipe, and if other people aren't waiting, if they're running late as well, I'll just run through some of the other stuff that I've got, which is the Boy Charlton pool competition, which I went in and had the backing of Tonkin's Alaka Greer.
Yeah, maybe just
Yeah. Yeah.
2 minutes because they're waiting.
Are they waiting? Okay. So I'll just talk about this. I'll because I kind of like this. Basically, this is the Boy Charlton pool, and it's the one space in Australia which has been continuously used for the same purpose by Aboriginal Australians and by up to the current day. So it's always been a swimming spot. So there's all these morphological traces of existing previous pools. So this was my drawing for that, and a model. And I'll finish. That's Magna Carta, but I didn't win that one either. So anyway, there you go. I think these people are waiting. So
Yeah.
okay.
Thank you very much. Maybe just one question.
Yeah.
Because any questions?
You've got the images embedded into the concrete.
It's basically. I'll go back. It's if you look at these things, it's basically a form liner. So what they do is they CNC route into a piece of MDF the positive image of what it is. So it's like a relief image. So it's made up like a record groove. So so the depth of the groove, it's a bit like spots on a print, a newsprint picture. The bigger the spot, that's and the closer they are together, the darker the tone. So it's exactly the same principle. In fact, there's another company which is using exactly that same principle to create that. So you're creating a shadow, but this is using lines. So there's a single bit in the CNC router, kind of moves along and it goes up and down to create different depths. And then they pour a rubber mould on top of that, and they use that as the form liner. And then they, that was the part that was put on the outside layer of the mould. And then they pour the concrete, and it's important to use a really a high slump concrete. So you can choose like 180 to 200, 250 slump or something like that. And you should all learn your concrete grades as well, because that's incredibly important depending upon what you're doing. And then they vibrate it, and to get rid of any bubbles and voids in the concrete, and then they strip the mould, and there you've got it. So it's a great process. Yeah.
So the final lining is the rubber, like a rubber etching.
No, the final lining is concrete.
No, that like as the form.
The form liner, yeah, it's a rubber. Yeah, so it's like a high density rubber, and it can be reused again and again and again. But because each individual image was specific to this thing, the form liners only get one use in this instance. But you can see it on some buildings. They use it architecturally, and they repeat that pattern over and over again. Yeah. Yep.
Any questions? One more? Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Duncan.
Cheers, Alan.
That was very
Thank
nice.
you.
Thank you.
Cheers. Okay, I better get this.
So
out of the way.
we continue in classes. Just alumni courtyard, please come in 30 minutes. I want to have a chat with Duncan and see you at 1 in level 5, room 5. Yep, the alumni courtyard. Thank you.